The purpose of this video is to explore more in depth the 7 keys to creating a successful cooperative learning environment. Some of these keys we have already discussed, so that part will be a review, and some of these will be new. So Kagan discusses these 7 key components that he calls structures, how to form teams, management, class building, team building, social skills, and pies. So some of those should already look familiar to you. We're going to go key through key. You have a graphic organizer that I want you to be using to fill out, and so that you have a snapshot of these 7 keys all in one page, because these keys are really the things that separate cooperative learning groups from our traditional learning groups. So the first key is structures, and structures simply is a term that Kagan uses to describe the ways that teachers create interaction between themselves and their students, and the ways that they organize content in their classroom. So structures is not a term that's just unique to cooperative learning. Kagan says traditional structures that are used in traditional classrooms would be things like lecture. And if you think about what lecture does, the interaction between teacher and students, well, the interaction is the teacher is usually standing in front of the class, giving the information. Students are listening, writing it down. Popcorn reading is another structure. Right? The way that teachers and students are interacting is a teacher randomly calls on students to read or has students choose each other. And the way they're interacting with the content is by listening to other people read. Now, we're not particularly fond of either one of those traditional structures. Lecture is important sometimes, but kept to a minimum. And the reason is because there isn't much interaction. So some cooperative learning examples of structures would be numbered heads together, where every student has a number and you pose a question, they put their brains together and hold up the corresponding number. Or we often do it as letters to mimic standardized test type of questions. Quiz, quiz, trade. So students are up and moving around, asking each other questions, affirming the correct answers, reteaching if necessary. The jigsaw strategy is a way to get students interacting with text, but with the appropriate support that's not available in popcorn reading. So students are grouped together, they're reading together, answering questions, helping clarify for each other. And the cooperative learning structures tend to get a lot more interaction going on, which is important, and help support students with their understanding of the content. They're not just left on their own to kind of sink and swim like what happens a lot of times in lecture. One of the things with structures is that none of these structures are content specific. You can lecture in any field, right? You can do popcorn reading with any type of text. You can do numbered heads together, quiz, quiz, trade, jigsaw in any content area. So the nice thing is that when we teach a structure to our students, we can then repeat it. If we taught it in a history lesson, we can do it again in language arts. We can use it again in a math content area. Here's a practical tip for you. The first time you introduce a structure, use simpler content. So it's great to introduce a structure to review the first time. It's going to take you twice as long because you're working on the content and you're also teaching the steps to the structure. So you really have to think through, all right, how am I going to model this structure? Go step by step. Maybe you use one group to model it. Have the steps written out. And then after you've done this structure, so if I've taught my students quiz, quiz, trade, I want to do that same structure, use it again in a relatively short amount of time. I say within a week, ideally within a couple of days. And you can use it in a different content area. But the reason you want to do it again quickly is so that students can remember the steps to the strategy, have them up again just as a reminder. But that way students will be like, oh yeah, quiz, trade. We just did that a couple of days ago. And the steps will start to become automatic. Usually by the third time that you've done a structure with students, they're like, oh yeah, I know what that is. So then you don't have to spend all of that time of reteaching the structure. If you do a roundtable and then you don't do it again for a month, a lot of the students are going to have forgotten about, all right, what was that? So just a good little practical tip. So Kagan says, the more interactive structures we provide throughout the day, the better interaction we're going to get between the teacher and students, among all of the students, and the better interaction we're going to get with students with the content. And we know students need to be exposed to the content, they need to discuss it, they need to see it, they need to do a variety of activities with it to make it really stick. The second key is teams. And the definition of a team is just simply a group of students who establish a team identity and who work together over time. Kagan recommends that we keep our home teams together for 6 weeks. I personally have found that I prefer a 9-week block. That way we have 4 different teams throughout the school year. And Kagan identifies 4 types of teams. The first one is heterogeneous. This is what I would call the home team. The teams will spend most of their time with this group. And we've already discussed how to set those teams up and what variables we need to look at. But sometimes we want to have homogeneous groups or teams based on ability level or student interest. So these can be created by assigning, for example, your lowest student in each group a number 1, your highest students number 4, your middle students number 2s and 3s. So I can pull, all right, I'm going to have all of the 2s work together on this assignment. I'm going to have all the 1s work together. And that way we can get students who are closer in ability. Sometimes that's really helpful if you've got some challenging content and you want to, you can probably go faster with the number 4s than you can the number 1s, or you need to provide that additional support. Number 3 type of team is random. And this is where you might have students just randomly pull a number out of the hat to get in their teams. You can use random teams. The benefit is to spice things up, just to change things up a little bit. For example, for a class project where you want to get them working with different people. The problem is when you do this, you could quite possibly get all of your low students on one team, which might then make the project more difficult. So you want to do this for a class project where maybe academics are not as important. For example, I used to teach my 4th graders how to make piñatas, and it's a multi-process step. That would be something that, so they made a group piñata together. That would be something that I could do as a random type of project just to get my students interacting with each other, because it's not academically challenging. It's challenging in some other ways. And the 4th type of team is student selected. This type of team empowers students with being able to choose. For example, for a review activity, you might say, I'm going to allow you to pick your own groups. One of the things that I used to do is my students would write a song using a familiar tune, but they would write the lyrics to show their understanding of the gold rush. And on that, I would allow them to select their own teams so that they could have that creativity and maybe work with other students with whom they hadn't worked yet in the year. Or, for example, I might do literature circles where I have 6 different novels that they're choosing from, and they get to self-select, and then they're forming their own groups based on the novel that they chose, because I'm always trying to bring in different topics to appeal to different students, right? So that would be an example of a student selected team. The vast majority of your teams or your team activities should be done in the heterogeneous model, because if you're constantly mixing up the teams, your home team isn't going to bond or establish that team identity. So this is the main one, and then on occasion we can use these 3 other types of teams. Also, just as a reminder, ideal number of team members is 4. The reason for that is it's easy for them to group together. Also, it's easy for you to break them up into pairs, because with cooperative learning, we will do a lot of things with partners. And if you have an uneven number, it depends. You can go down and have one team of 3 or have another team of 5. When you get more though than 5, it really does make it difficult to give everybody a chance to share. So we really want to try and stick with 4, or then one group of 3 or one group of 5.